Two, one. Welcome everybody to this next session of the Virtual Coaches Clinic being brought to you by Basketball Embassy. And we're excited to have Coach Tom Johnson joining us today. Really enjoyed our pre-conversations that Coach Johnson and I have been having about this topic. I think that we both share an agreement in the overall development of our athletes, not just the basketball skills, but you know, the kind of a whole approach to helping our players and really, you know, building those connections with them. So I'm looking forward to having Coach Johnson present to us today. Again, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box here so that we can address those questions at the end. So Coach Johnson, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it right over to you and let you take it away here. And again, thank you so much for being a part of this session today.
Oh, great. Well, you know, thanks for having me. It's as we're all in this suspended state, I'm sure that a lot of coaches are going to be improving and getting better and hopefully expanding their philosophies about the game. And, you know, for me, the purpose of what I'm going to present today is it really comes from, you know, a long journey from North America and then coming over to Europe and finishing up my playing career and immediately going into coaching. So for me, it's just an opportunity to develop the philosophy about teaching players the game and hopefully some open up some ways of thinking about your coaching philosophy and how mine has adapted over the years that I've been here in Europe. So yeah, so it's pretty. I put in the Canadian, the Belgian flag because you know I'm born and raised in Canada, but most of my professional working career has been in Belgium, and this is a base for me over here. You know, today I'm just going to talk about and reflect on, you know, my experiences, not to go into, you know, all the places that I've been, but just to hopefully give a bit of an arc and a sense of, you know, where my foundation of teaching and how my philosophy has changed. Also just talk about, you know, an idea and pose the question to coaches, you know, when does player development really actually begin? And then go into, you know, sort of kind of the meat and potatoes of kind of what I want to share today, which is to talk about teacher-coach methodology, a way to how you approach your individual sessions with your athlete to help them get better. So today, not so much drills and visual drills, but more about like the concept in and around how to expand and develop and be a better teacher coach. And then I will talk about like a template and a breakdown of time over about 1 hour and 20 minutes or 1 hour and 30 minutes maximum, and some components that I feel that's necessary for you to have in your practice template when you're working with your athletes. And then we can look at setting and establishing detailed goals. These detailed goals over what, you know, we don't often be blessed to have 4 years nowadays with an athlete, but, you know, try to give you a big picture of how to look at things from a starting point and end point, maybe in an Olympic cycle, where you have, if you're blessed enough to have players within your club organization for 4 years, but more over a year, like a macro picture of a year and maybe some microcycles. And then look at just what my definition of transference is. So, you know, all of that work that you do, and the ultimate goal is to have your player to be in the optimal performance form for your team, for your season. And then just some misconceptions about talent, and hopefully I think there'll be enough time to hopefully answer a few questions. So the first part is, you know, question is, do you want better plays or better players? So for me, it's simple. I want better players. You know, I want more skilled, quicker, smarter, faster, right? And so that way, whatever it is that you're doing and whatever it is that you're running in complete picture, offensively, philosophy, that players can adapt into that system. So it's less concerned about, you know, better plays and just trying to develop the best players that we can. So just looking at, like, you know, quickly, like if I look at the sort of, you know, where things started for me growing up in Canada, obviously, you know, the grassroots began with a kind of a multi-sport platform. So with the North American system, the Canadian system, we play multiple sports. So I played a plethora of sports. I mean, obviously basketball was something that I started to focus and emphasis on, started to concentrate my emphasis and my focus on, you know, probably when I was about 16, 17 years old. But I played football, American football. I played baseball. I was in track and field. So I think that I start with that because in Europe we tend to, and over the years we tend to be more specialized so much earlier, and also with the complexity and how the pace of life, that it's just difficult for parents to get their kids to multiple activities. But again, without the high school system, it's difficult to get the same foundational skills and the different aspects of athleticism that you get from all those sports. So my early beginnings was quite fortunate because I was able to play many different sports and develop, you know, my athleticism. I feel that at stages where it was necessary to bring those components of athleticism in college, in college years, I mean, I was blessed to have a foundation of teaching. My university coach was a coach by the name of Ken Shields, who was also the national team coach. He was my junior national team coach. I was involved with the junior national team program for 3 years. And then I was 6 years involved with the Canadian national team program. So I was very blessed through the college and the national team to have essentially the same coach in university that was coaching the national team program. And with the national team, we had, you know, our staff was phenomenal. Ron Adams was one of our assistant coach. He did our defense 1 year. Dale Harris came in to help Ken work on concepts offensively. So I think that being exposed to those kind of voices and that kind of coaching and teacher coaches helped me form the importance of the fundamental aspect of the game. And then into my pro career, and you kind of I think oftentimes as you go to the next level, you think that coaching or teaching is going to get better, but it's not necessarily so. So my pro career had me play in 6 different countries. I was kind of a journeyman in Europe, and I would have loved to have just, you know, hunkered down and stayed in one place, but it just didn't happen like that for me. But looking back, with all those different experiences that I have, all those different voices, all those different coaches, I think it's helped me moving forward after my playing career into coaching. It helped me reflect, to think about why did we do that? Definitely don't want to do that moving forward. And so all of those experiences helped me, I think, at the beginning of my coaching career. With my coaching career, also, I coached in 6 different countries. So I think adapting to different cultures, new styles of play, and I think it's just, I think that it's important that you take the time and reflect, because I really feel it takes 6, 7, maybe 8 years to really be comfortable and firm about what you believe in about teaching the game. And even now, you know, I found myself adapting. You know, coming back to the early beginnings and looking at the pro career, I played my pro career in the 90s. And in the 90s, if I think about individual player development and I think about what was happening, there was very little early time. So the staff of all those places that I went, there was not like coaches on the floor working with players before practice for 10, 15 minutes, or there wasn't much late time. I think we were self-motivated, intrinsically motivated as professionals to get out, get there early, get your shots up, You may have a couple teammates that you connect with and that you're working together and you're spending some time developing your game. But the funny thing is now going forward, I think player development has changed to the point where, you have coaches. I want to have coaches on the court, a staff of coaches that can work with players before practice and work with players after practice, and certainly in the off season. So I think that that's one of the biggest things that now it's changed so much, the amount of time and resources or the thought process about individual player development. So when does player development begin? For me, it begins, you can know what the things are to do, or you can have a set of drills, or you can have a template to work with when you're working with your athletes. But I think it really begins when the athlete buys in to what is going on and commits to the process of this fundamental development and deems it very, very important and takes it extremely serious. So the intrinsic motivation is very, very important here. Without that, then it's really difficult because, you don't want to have to coach motivation and coach effort. But when you see players step on the floor and take a commitment to the process of getting better and are dialed in, then I think that it's at that moment that it seriously begins for the player. The last 2 points there, I just said the focus of individual player development, I think, is more in the off season. I think that during the in season, you have your team tactical, your team concepts, your holistic concepts of what you're doing on team offense, team defense, your overall team execution. But I think that, so it's very difficult to have a great deal of individual player development when you're in season. So I think that the majority of it and the mapping out of the player development has to be done in the off-season phase. Just moving into, so there's 3 concepts that I feel that are very, very important in terms of your methodology, in terms of working with your athletes or athlete. So the first thing is execution confidence, okay? And this is basically, the second bullet point is the mastery through repetition. So part method repetition of task, fundamental or skill, okay? And this combined with positive and constructive verbal feedback, okay? So it's important that in this execution confidence part, when you have the opportunity to work with people in maybe with in a one-on-one situation with your athlete, or in a small group, is that you can really break down details and nuances of everything that you're doing. So you're obviously looking at your deficits. Players have a deficit. If you're looking at what the fundamental weaknesses, skill weaknesses are, obviously you have the time to break things down in part method and really give lots of repetition to this specific deficit, okay? And also place emphasis on strengths, because I think this is important. But I think that this is the way to start having the players see the small increments of improvement over a period of time. The second part of the methodology is a creative freedom. So allowing freedom in combining moves and actions. So, for me, you take in one-on-one situations, the game has become, high tempo, trying to teach players how to individually create space off the dribble, how to be available off the ball using screens. So I think that in combining all these different actions and teaching them the nuances of these actions, I think that this is a very strong and very important aspect. I like to videotape. If I have a staff of assistant coaches, I'd like to be able to videotape some of these actions and play them back to the players after the session so that they can see when they're doing things correctly. So they get a visual. So important that because most players are quite visual. I know that I'm quite visual. So it's important that the players can see these improvements, see the positive execution, and see maybe the not so positive execution, and that it provides a visual for the players to motivate them, for them to come back the next day and start improving on this thing, and I feel that this part allows them to feel the progressions, and there's acceleration in this kind of what I call field progression. And the third and maybe the most important thing, because now the way the game has changed, and because now there's more time in individual development with coaches spending time with their athletes, is that this commitment bond. So the player and the coach having this trust factor, because you can't communicate and you can't speak the same way to players as coaches were speaking to me in my generation and era. Had a lot of discussions with coaches about this, and I think, of course, there's an integrity involved with this. Obviously, you have to know your stuff, so you have to understand what the fundamentals are with footwork, with all aspects and of skill development, because players are becoming more aware and smart to know that what good teaching is and what good coach. So I think that your commitment and integrity to the individual sessions and the work with your athletes is very important. So this connection on a human level. That means that you have lots of discussions with your athletes before and after practice. For me, as an ex-professional player and an ex-national team player, I have, a lot of experiences that I'd like to share with my players, and give them like a sense of, where they are now, where they can go, instilling a lot of confidence in them, because I think that this part is important from the aspect of, I've had many discussions, with players who had an experience with the coach, a bad experience, and the love of the game went away. So I think that you're there to sell hope and to sell promise as to your athlete, to your player, as much as you are to help them teach the game and to support them. So this, in essence, is educating your players about really what the top athletes are doing in the sport of basketball. So an understanding. So simply, like, oftentimes when you're doing things in your team practices, you're doing things, whole picture, team tactical, it may be that players don't understand. You may think that they understand, but I think that the individual sessions and the connection with your athletes in those individual sessions gives you the opportunity to develop this understanding as a player, from the player to the coach and the coach to the player. So I always ask the question, and there's a lot of examples so I can use, but how many ways are there to play the game? So I can just pose this question to my player, very intimately, and see what their response is. For me, there's two. Okay, there's the right way, and there's the wrong way. Okay, so in this question, I'm more focusing and emphasizing on values and the values in which that I feel that are important in order to play the game the right way. Okay, so it's really, this is an understanding and a mindset about effort, competitiveness, and selflessness. So, for example, if I take a shot and I get fouled, and I put my head down and I think the referee should have called the foul, and I don't run back and I don't sprint back on defense. Is that the right way or is that the wrong way? So, and the player will hopefully say, no, that's the wrong way. I got to sprint back on defense, coach. And so there, right at that moment, you have an understanding. Okay, so that's one example, but there's layers to that. Whatever you deem in your value system as a coach, in terms of mindset about effort, competitiveness, and selflessness, this is a very important question to ask. And herein lies, again, the opportunity to have a tremendous commitment bond with your athlete and have an understanding about your value system. And here, the second question is, how many habits are there in basketball? Well, there's two, right? Good and bad. Right? We keep it simple. And so this is more emphasizing the fundamentals, correct fundamentals of the game. So if you're dribbling with your head down, the question you can pose to your athlete, you're dribbling with your head down, okay? Is that good or is that bad? And most players hopefully will say bad. And so obviously, if you're dribbling with your head down, teammates open, you can't make the one more pass for an open uncontested shot, a great terminal action, or you're going to dribble the ball into a difficult situation. So there again, starting with that emphasis, but there's obviously you can create your own habit questions, okay, to pose to your athletes. And there, again, we have an understanding immediately at that moment. So we both understand now. So establishing and detailed goals. So now we get into the starting point and end point. So again, we can be fortunate to have an athlete within our club, within our system for 4 years. But nowadays, I know in Europe, players are transferring. It's very difficult to keep a core nucleus of players around. In other countries like France, I know we have, you have, for example, the Espoir contract where you can lock players in for, 3, 4, 5 years. And then you can really map out, in essence, an Olympic cycle and hopefully see the progressions with these players over that period of time within your culture. But certainly, over a year period, it's very important to have your evaluations already set up at the beginning of your season, and looking, of course, at the weaknesses. But here I just mentioned the strengths, because oftentimes when we're trying to maybe develop, of course we want to develop as complete all-around players, but sometimes we forget to emphasize the strengths that a player has. I remember it was years ago, I saw a blog with Ettore Messina, and he was talking about if a player can catch and shoot with high efficiency, an open shot, and can defend maybe multiple positions on the basketball court with great intensity and can win one-on-one battles and situations, just those two components, a player can play domestically as a pro in Europe. Okay, so I think it's important that we may not have, not everyone's going to be a Kobe Bryant and a LeBron James in terms of totality, in terms of all these facets to make the complete. But I still think that it's important to also consider the strengths of the player. The opportunities is really important, because in the European, in Europe, in the club system here in Belgium, oftentimes at the youth level, you have two team trainings of 90 minutes. Maybe depending on the club, you may have an advanced session. So there may be another practice session where you're working on individual skills and advanced skills. But, essentially 2 practices a week and a game on the weekend. So obviously it's an issue of what a appropriate professional model of development is in terms of practice time. So it's really important that we're looking at what kind of opportunities do you have to spend time with your athletes on the court and try to find ways and more resources to try to help your players expand their knowledge of the game, be better athletes, and be more skilled. And the second point is, like, if you don't have you don't have to be a nutritional scientist, but I think that you have to understand the protocols of good nutrition. And I think a lot of people have an idea about what that is, but it's easy enough to access. And if you're not promoting and enforcing and invigilating your players to eat well, to train well, then it's going to be a fail. Yeah, increased athleticism. So we want to make them better. So we want to try to detail, map out sport-specific strength and conditioning, which you can do in your practice template, which will be coming up in a moment here. I'll be going into that a little bit more, and just components of making your players better athletes. And then, the mindset and the mental aspect is the main thing is to make them sustain longer periods of concentration and effort on the basketball court. So I think that these components, when you're looking at your macro planning, these components I think are vital to be in there. In terms of the practice template, so for me, I think I put it 1 hour and 20 because, we have so many short concepts and bursts that I think 1 hour and 20 is well enough time to get the kind of work, because I think you get to the point where you get into past 1 hour and 30, 1 hour 45, 2 hours. I think it's too long for individual player development. Okay, so with the hour and 20, this is factoring in, you're warming up, and then the bulk part of your work, and then into a cool down situation. So as part of your warming up, I'd like to talk about the correctives, and the correctives are the physical deficits that your player can have. So if you don't have an understanding of what those things are in terms of your evaluation of movement, hopefully you have access to a physiotherapist or some kind of physical preparator that can maybe identify those things in your players and athletes. And I think here you can really spend time, if you know what those things are, and spend time on those movements before your basketball practice, part of your development practice begins. So big problem with players is the hip girdle. So the hips. So in the hip girdle, you got like really small muscle groups, and so we're working with the larger muscle groups. And basketball is a game with, it's an explosive game. We're using the larger muscle groups. If the small muscle groups, so the intrinsic muscles, synergist muscles, aren't functioning well, then the big muscle groups, you're going to have problems. Okay, you're not going to be functioning with those big muscle groups at the highest level of efficiency. So we want to have more range of motion in the hip girdle. Okay, we got more range of motion in the shoulder girdle, and if you know how to make those measurements, those functional measurements, it's very easy to start adding these components in your, if you want to call it your dynamic warm-up, that's fine, but you can start doing some exercises. You can bring bands on. You can do different things with movement where we can prepare the body for the more physical and explosive work that's going to follow. And then, in terms of what you're doing, we're working in concepts and the most commonly used offensive actions. So here you can go part method and break down, concepts or parts of what you're doing offensively. And here it's where it's so vitally important with your assistant coaches. If you can't be on the court and do this with your players, then you want your assistant coaches to be able to understand, the whole picture of what you're doing offensively and be able to break down these concepts and these actions in these operational zones specific to the positions of the players. So I oftentimes, if I have the time and resource to do that, I will separate my big players from my smalls. And so that way we can get more repetition in those operational zones of the bigs that's specific to what you're doing in your offensive sets. Okay. And also, and conversely also with your smalls, your guards, your wings, so that you can break down these actions. And then, of course, in your team practice, you can combine those, the smalls and the bigs, but you get an opportunity to get much more repetition if you can divide your bigs and your smalls in these individual sessions. Yeah, and the game speed simulation. So what I like to do is I work in, maximum 1 minute to 2 minute intervals. So we get, if we're doing something with combination moves off the dribble, okay, and counter moves, without going into any specific drills, we will work at game speed, okay? Perfect fundamentals, all of the nuances of what's happening in that situation, maybe how to create separation, always the feedback of the vision and the head up. If we're talking about reception of the ball from the wing position or moving off screens, then everything you have to do has to be game simulation, in the sense of you have to have an act before you get the ball. So if you're static and you do anything static, then that's not game-like. So we want to, everything with step off, step in, show different acts. I call them acts before receiving the ball. So we want to get in, get contact, be available, and then we can start whatever action that you're working on. So always trying to make it as game-like and game-specific as possible. Now, after these two minutes, or after the minute and 30, I always empty each concept or each glass of water, I like to say that, with foul shots. So it gets an opportunity for the player that may be a little bit tired. They get to the line, they shoot free throws, and then off they go into the next thing. So if you're going 2 minutes and 1 minute and, maybe 45 seconds off, 2 minutes, 45 seconds off, 2 minutes, it's amazing how much content and how industrious you can be in those sessions. And so therefore, if you're working like this, it's more game-like, it's more game-specific, and you get much more done in that amount of time. And I just put the boxing at the bottom because as part of your teaching, everything that we do is about these variations of speed. So I ask, how many speeds are there in the game of basketball? Well, there's 3, okay? I put fast first, but actually it's quick, okay? So quick is when I'm standing in front of a basketball. It's a loose ball. There's another player over there, and it's a 50-50 situation, okay? Who's going to get there the quickest? Who's going to get there quick? That's quick. Quick is also when I'm running down the floor, down the sideline at medium speed, and somebody's guarding me, and I step off and just cut on the inside of him really quickly. He doesn't know when that cut is going to happen. So for me, that's quick, okay? And so we don't have to be the best athletes in order to be able to use these changes of speed. So fast is simple. So fast, we're fast in transition. So if we're going to sprint down an offense, okay, on the change of possession, we better sprint back. Okay, so that's when we've got to be fast. And the slow part, very important. So slow part is when we're learning something for the first time. Okay, so I'm learning how to correct a flaw in my shooting mechanic. I'm learning how to run an offense for the first time. So when we run an offense as coaches and we demonstrate an offense to our players for the first time, we don't have them sprinting around and moving to the spots and the spacing, okay, at full speed, we first have them walk and move to these places. So I think that the elements of this quick, fast, and slow, for me, translates into deceptiveness. So you don't have to be the fastest player on the floor to be effective. So in your player development, to be working with maybe you're not your most athletic players, and explaining to them and teaching them these 3 speeds so they can change speeds and be deceptive and still have the opportunity to be effective as a player on the basketball floor. And transference. And so, you know, sort of leading up to this point, so the main and the ultimate goal is, you know, and I have here transfers the process by which you're able to apply your athletic training directly to basketball. Okay, so for me, the general rule of thumb is just in your sessions, just train like an athlete. Okay, so it's just common sense. So in basketball, we're losing large muscle groups, and all of your drills have to be in function of what you're doing on the basketball court. Okay, and rehearsing those actions and those movements, and creating you know, lots of different stimulus for the player, and working on all different components. The other thing about the thing is to work on injury prevention, because if you're making your athletes bigger, stronger, and faster, then the susceptibility to injury is more likely. So it's really important that as part of your warming up, coming back to that, and also part of your cool down, that you're doing things that not only just explosive movements of the jump, but also just demonstrating how to land and the landing, and how to decelerate, and how to transfer weight from a static position, from a movement position to a static position on one limb, and transfer it to the other one and hold static. So this idea, because in basketball, we're transferring weight from one limb to the other. So I like to call this compression. So it's really important to find that proprioceptive quality in the landing and the balance. Okay, so I'm always adding these components, and you know, and I find that since I've been doing this more and more, that the injuries can happen, but the severity of the injury can be minimalized, or you're just, you know, limiting just the amount of these problems that you're going to have during a season. So again, so just the technical and the tactical aspects all translate hopefully into the optimal game performance, and this is the ultimate goal that you're working towards. Just in terms of just some ideas about misconception of talent, because you know, when you're working with an athlete, I think you got to work within not just based on their age, but where they are in terms of their proficiency and their skill, and where they are, you know, maybe in their athletic development. So as we get moving forward into this sort of train to compete and train to win phase, it's really important that we understand that a player may be a little bit late mature physically. So we don't want to predict the size, because you can have a lot of situations where athletes are a little bit later mature. And here, just to see this this peak velocity height table, and so it shows here with girls that just before 12 years old is around 12 years old, where they get into, they're a little bit earlier mature than boys here. And then the boys are like just around 14 years old. But I've had so many examples over the years where a player comes into an extreme growth spurt at 17, maybe even to 18 years old. So it's just important for you to study and look at this aspect, to not place a label and a tag on an athlete and a player, because you can be surprised at you know, a later stage of development. So it's important to understand this here. And you know, God-given talent, you know, it can't be taught. Like I always say, it's like in this part, it's in this part of the finger oftentimes, but this talent still needs to be cultivated and developed. Okay, and so all the things that I talked to you about in specifically in this methodology part is, you know, the importance of understanding that the structure of what you do as a teacher coach forms the behavior and the habits. Okay, so it's how you work in your process every day, and the things that you focus on and deem important. Those are the things that will form the behavior and the habits and help your players, you know, hopefully reach their goals. So for me, that basically was what I wanted to share. Hopefully I didn't talk too long, too far, because I'd like to field some questions, but I just wanted to leave before Coach Layson comes in and asks me a few questions. I just wanted to say that, you know, coaching lasts a practice, a game, and a lifetime, but teaching, it lasts a lifetime. So over my 17 years and the relationships that I've formed with my players, I truly know that to be true. So I hope that you all become better teachers and teachers of the game. Be a teacher first, a coach second, and enjoy the rewards of seeing your players get better. Thank you.
Tom, thank you so much for presenting today. I just wanted to mention real quick, you mentioned three coaches early in your presentation: Ken Shields, Del Harris, and Rod Adams. For those of you in the audience who are not familiar with all three of those coaches, all three of them are incredible teachers. I would tell you that the Coach Harris and Coach Shields did a book a couple of years ago on zone offense, which it's basically my Bible on zone offense. And I would highly recommend it, as well as, you know, I think they did even a video production that's available on zone offense as well with some of their ideas. And then Ron Adams, when Ron Adams was a part of the staff at Fresno State back in the I guess the 80s, they were some of the best defensive teachers in the nation. And in fact, a lot of my defensive concepts come from Ron Adams, as well as Fred Litzenberger, who worked for Boyd Grant. And you can still find Coach Adams, I think, on YouTube. There's some FIBA videos in which he's teaching defense as well. So I would recommend checking those out. So let's get to some questions. First questions coming. This one comes in. Tom, thank you for joining us. It's an honor to have you with us on this session. So
thank you.
So, Coach, this comes from Tom Newell, and three questions here. I think these are all great. And Coach Newell, thank you for being with us today. Question one is, what is the most important message you leave with your team during and at the end?
I'm sorry, can you say that again? Ask the question again?
Yes, the question is, what is the most important message you leave with your team during and at the end?
During and at the end. Well, you know, for me, you know, it's the best effort. I mean, that when my players step on the floor, I think it's important that they understand what best effort is, and they understand what the practice discipline is, and the discipline comes from the discipline. So, you know, for me, it is to be very clear and to let my players know right from the beginning what the important things are in terms of effort, and giving their best effort, and then at the end is giving them the positive feedback when they've given that best effort. You know, for me, that's the most important thing.
Okay, here's part two to the question is, do you see more coaches needing instruction and better understanding of teaching first, coaching second? The lockdown is going to reintroduce participants again into a contact sport at every level. Many kids are going in with a serious lack of confidence, conditioning, number one, biomechanics, number two. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, like I say, in this completely surreal time and suspended state, I think that, as I said at the beginning, I think this is a great pause and a great opportunity for coaches to revisit their philosophy. But I hope they're spending time on really aspects of how to become better teachers, because now there's not the pressure and stress of having to win games. So coaches have an opportunity now and a chunk of time where they can really start to explore multiple different aspects of teaching and of coaching. So I think that this is a really good moment for them to look at some of these aspects of how to become a better teacher first and a coach second, and start to implement them more in their coaching philosophy and execution with their players and with their team.
Okay, last part of the question from Coach Noodle is, are you concerned about the restart?
Well, yeah, I think everyone's a little bit, because I think it's really, no one really knows. Like, I think that obviously with the NBA announcing that they're back online, I think from the people and coaches that I've spoken with, kind of feel that if they get back online and there's no glitches and things kind of start to flow, that maybe the other, FIBA and the other organizations can start to get started. I know that here in Belgium, the president of the federation, he's spoken about, not being excited about starting the season with without supporters. So I think that in this time now, it's difficult in the sense of you can't get on the floor in the court because the gyms aren't open, to work with players in that way, to evaluate players and test players. So we can have, I think there's open air workouts, so you can get out on outdoor courts, and a lot of coaches and teams are starting to do this. But I think that everyone's looking at hopefully the beginning of August, when actually it's typical and normal for teams to begin. Usually the end of the first week of August into the second week, teams are beginning to start their team practices. But I think that this is also making and forcing coaches to find new ways to develop their players. So I think you can develop players. Certainly you can work on physical conditioning aspects more now. So you can get outside, you can work with your players this way. You can have more conversations on an individual level. You can maybe watch basketball with your players and watch your team and evaluate your team from birth. So there's things, certainly enough things that you can keep yourself busy with. But I think that it's certainly a bit of, coming back to the original question, it's a little bit unknown right now, really kind of what's going to happen, when it's going to start.
Next question is, how do you handle players who come across as selfish?
Sorry?
How do you handle players, or how do you work with players who perhaps seem to be selfish, either in, by their manner of play or just their attitude within the team? How do you address that and work with players in that?
Right. Yeah, I think that this is where I think, video becomes vitally important, and especially with your staff. So, I think this is something that has to be evaluated during your practice template. So I really try to, I always say that, and I always take notes after every practice, not just of what's happening in terms of, offensive execution or defensive execution, but also in terms of mindset, behavior. And this then allows you to sit down with your staff and discuss these individual behavioral things in terms of how it affects your team. And if I can't do it, then I certainly want my assistant, one of my assistant coaches, to be able to sit down, maybe look at shot selection with the player, revisit the role with the player, and always do this in a positive, constructive way, because I think that because the player may not, again, have the understanding that those shots that he or she is taking that are bad shots. So it's your responsibility as a coach to identify and solidify and make the player understand, what the role is, and what a good shot and what a bad shot is. And I think that if you sit down and you do this in a visually, I think the video is so extremely powerful, and it just doesn't lie. Okay, so this would be the first way. I mean, there's some things that you're forced to have to make a blink decision with in terms of behavior, but I think in terms of the self, it may be that the player is not thinking that this is a selfish behavior, and so it's your responsibility to have a sit down and have a discussion, and to sort through that in a constructive, positive way.
Next question is, in terms of talent, when scouting a young player, what are the most important criteria you observe?
Well, just with the eyeball test, I mean, you can obviously, if I'm sitting in the tribune and I'm watching a young player, I mean, you can obviously see that there's some major strengths in the areas of ball handling, in creativity, in a mindset and a determination or a competitiveness that separates that player from the rest of the players that I see on the floor in that moment. So I think that those are some of the things that I would just look at from a visual, technical standpoint. But then, it's obviously by looking at the frame of the player, of the athlete, the age and the length and the frame of the athlete in terms of, how big the feet are, what's the wingspan, and I think these things I think are important to look at also. I think also to see what the level of concentration that the player has on the court for sustained periods of time, how distracted they are by maybe the sideline or the supporters, the ability to have kind of a next play mentality. If there's a mistake made, does the player hold the head down, walk back on defense? Just kind of what kind of attitude and mindset the player has. And sometimes that can be more telling than maybe what the technical ability of the player is. That you see these components and this kind of mindset, then, especially at a certain age, those are really powerful. It's a powerful evaluation to see a player do these things.
I would certainly agree with that. I think that just, not just the actions on the court, but then, what is their decorum on the bench? What is their body language when talking to their coaches? How do they act in the timeout? There's, again, like you said, there's so many things to evaluate on, and sometimes I would rather lean towards, are they truly, good body language, good eye contact? Are they, supporting their teammates? Those types of things, making sure that those things to me are more important, in terms of, is this person a good fit for our program or a good fit for the team? And maybe there's some things on the court that over time, just with working and reps, they develop better.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about won't mention the game or the place, but obviously pre-COVID, and I was watching a very talented player, and got substitution. He subbed out of the game, and he walked by the bench and walked by the coach, walked to the end of the bench, and sat like two seats over away from the rest of his teammates. And so for me, as you say, I really like to see what's happening when the player leaves the game, comes off the floor. Is he interacting with his teammates on the bench? Is he sitting as far as he can away from the coach or the assistant coaches? So I think that this is very important when you're evaluating players, especially in-game evaluation and scouting. I think that this part is very important.
Next question is, notice that some of the players are talented but no discipline. How do you address that as a coach?
Yeah, well, I think that there is something about the type of very, very high quality teacher coach model at a specific age. I think by the time you know at 14 years old, I think at the 14-year age group, it's very important that players have a very, very solid template or model to follow in terms of practice discipline. So how do you practice well? When the coach calls you in, when the coach blows the whistle, do you have a captive audience? Players got to be captive. So I was some years ago, I had an opportunity to visit Panathinaikos, and I saw their youth practices from U16 up to U19. I watched all of their trainings, and there was no talking. There was no talking going on. When the whistle blowed, the players were in, and the body language of the players. So I always want eye contact. So I get my players in always when I start practice, and I put them in a semicircle. So there's no one standing or sitting in behind anyone. I want to see everyone, and almost on an arc, so that I can see everyone within my peripheral vision, and they can see me. And I want eye contact, and I want good body posture. And so I think this discipline starts from the moment you address your team, from the beginning of practice until the practice is over. Okay. So I think that this is something that can be formed. So again, the structure forms the behavior. So I think that if you can communicate, and if you don't express to your players that part of discipline is, if you don't express to them that that's important, then they won't deem it as important. So it can be a bit of a struggle and a resistance at the beginning, but you'll find that the players, they want to play that way. They want to practice that way. But it's industrious, and it's focused, and it's disciplined, and that's how it needs to be. And so I think that that discipline is formed from the structure of how you employ your practices.
Okay, next question is, when it comes to a very young player, this is an 11-year-old girl who's showing incredible decision-making skills and great basketball IQ, which would be the right way to go regarding the volume of work that she should do? Should she be protected until a certain age in terms of practice time and games?
I'd be curious to know if this is coming from North America or Europe.
I don't see the answer there on that one. No. Would you address both?
So I think it comes back to what I was discussing. There is such a strong emphasis on maybe too early specialization. I know, in Belgium, there's such a heavy, there's so much pressure on kids academically here. And I think to answer the question, it depends on what the stage of development is and maturity is of that player. I mean, there's just some kids that can practice 15 to 16 hours a day, not to overtrain, but to do that in the right thresholds of intensity. But there's some kids that need to be able to be on the floor and work, or else they're feeling, or they're going to be unhappy, or they're going to be not satisfied, or they're going to be agitated and irritated. So I think that just depends on what the age and stage, what the development is, maturity level is of that player. But if I was just to look at that without seeing the athlete, I would think that there would be a more well-rounded template of development for that 11-year-old, meaning that hopefully multiple activities, the ability to do multiple things, and not just the emphasis and specialization on just one activity, one sport. But of course, you know, if that athlete is demanding and is driven and is wanting to have this, then it may be in the best interest to put that. It's your responsibility then, as the parent, to give that athlete more opportunities to develop, more opportunities to learn. And I think that that's important because the failure part may affect that child worse than the all the effort put in. So I think that that's important.
Okay, next question is, how do we create a no blame culture in a team?
A no blame culture. Well, I think it starts with your individual, with your entrance meetings with your players. I think that, again, when you're talking about your team, you know, a lot of coaches are talking about like an 8-player rotation, right? But even if you're in an 8-player rotation and you don't have the luxury of having maybe a 10 or an 11-player rotation, I still think you need to be able to, again, have a commitment bond with all 12 of your players. So that means that you have to connect on a human level with each of your players. And I think that starts with your entrance meetings with your players when they come in, and have a very, very clear, honest evaluation of the player and what the role is going to be, and place an importance to those players individually from you as coach, as that, hey, your role is important. I mean, you're a very important part of this process, or, you know, we're looking to, this is where you are now, and, you know, maybe we can't have you in this role right now, but we'd like to have you in this, and we'd like to, but not to etch that in stone, and we want to expand it. We want to expand that role. There's a possibility and room for this. So I think that it's important that you have this commitment bond, and that you're working not just your starting players or maybe 1 through 8, that you're taking time to work with your players during the season from 9 to 12 individually, before practice, after practice. And this way, it's like, this is the best way to take contentious feelings away from players. It's inevitable that not everyone's going to play the same, that people are going to play less, but it's really important to evaluate those minutes during the course of a journey in a season. And you can see a player that maybe got 10 or 12 minutes, then you want to make sure that at the beginning of the week that you spend time with that player before practice or after practice, work with them. And they can, if they're a competitor, they're not going to be happy and satisfied with playing 12 minutes. But at the end of the day, they're going to say, well, coach worked with us. Coach wants me to get better. He's still involved with me. And I think that this is something that we can all control, but sometimes we forget about at the expense of having to win games all the time. So this is a really important thing that we have to consider, is to be working with players 1 through 12 and connect with all of 12 of our players, and appreciate, give them appreciation for their effort and commitment to the team, and just continue working with them in a season-long process.
Next question. Tom, you were a great shooter during your career. What are the 3 most important aspects you teach to a young player about shooting?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I think you have to start with, form and technique. So if I'm working with somebody for the first time, I'm just going to go through, the mechanical aspects of form shooting and the things that I feel that are important. First thing is that we emphasize that I work on is I look at at shooting line. So it's like, is the shot straight? Okay. So if I take a player, I'll take a player and I'll put them in the front, facing the basket, because from the 45-degree angles, it's really difficult to get a visual evaluation as a coach when you're working with your player individually on the shooting line. So the best places to do that is directly in front of the basket at the free throw area. So that way, from a back view, when you're standing behind, you can just start with the end part of the shot, which is the follow through. And so from there, you can start to see over multiple repetition, is the shot going straight? Is it pulling to the left? Is it pulling to the right? Okay. So first thing is the shooting line. And then the second thing that I would work on is the trajectory. So, I'd be looking at, so if you're consistently hitting the front part of the rim, then most likely the shot is flat. So we're just trying to emphasize the elbow lift and the high trajectory, so that you're using the largest surface area of the rim when it's coming down into the basket. And then instead of just starting with the feet, I don't start with the feet. I'll come back to the feet, because that can be something that can be affecting later. But the first part, as I look at it, though, is honestly the top end part, the last part of the shot. And then I'll just look at the feet, the separation of feet, the balance of the feet, and the position of the deep muscle or the core position, the hips in nice stable balanced position. So those would be the things that I would start working with, with shooting with a player individually.
Okay, next question is from for Brian Lynch. Brian, thank you for being a part of the session today with us. Coach, in Belgium, seasons go from August to end of April, and most sports in the summer are more camps. Do you see it as an advantage for the youth in Europe to spend more time on the game, or better like in the US, where they have seasons for every sport, which lasts like 3 months per sport?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. Again, it comes back to what I was discussing at the beginning about the multiple sport template. I think that I only focused and emphasized basketball once I was 17 years old, and then it was then everything else kind of got narrow. But I think that obviously the camp experience and summer camp experience is vitally important. But I think that as Coach Lynch is referring to, I think that I'd love to have more opportunities for kids to explore different activities, different sports, and maybe just have a little bit more support in the model for in terms of the academics and the sportive balance. I'd like players to have some more opportunities, to have more practice time, to have more ability to play some other sports in different seasons. But unfortunately, in Europe, it doesn't seem to be trending that way.
Next question is, what is the difference for you as a coach between male and female players when teaching the game?
Yeah. Well, I've been working with women's teams in the last 2 years, actually. So I was coaching men, and it's interesting. I think that for me, it's because of the big thing is the component of athleticism. And so when you're talking about the universal and fundamental weaknesses, so if we're talking about, for example, layups, okay, finishing, it's normal that for a woman, for a girl, in general, don't have the same level of lift and extension and length at the rim on the finish. So the sweet spot when they're coming in to lay the ball, it's farther away. A more explosive male athlete can get to that spot with length and lay it in and hit that point on the square or drop it over the front part of the rim. But because of because they're different kinds of athlete and don't have the same kind of vertical athleticism, then of course the efficiency of finishing changes. So in your practice template, if you're not spending the appropriate time as part of your teaching and development and your drill emphasis on finishing, then that's going to affect you a lot, because there's more missed layups in ladies basketball than there is at a certain level. Of course, I'm talking about WNBA, but I'm talking in college, but I'm talking about at the development level. This is something that is greatly affected. The other thing is that from a team tactical, the greatest thing about coaching women is that there's an elimination of ego. So, I mean, for me, you can have a discussion with a male player. You can give feedback and be critical of a player, and hopefully in a constructive way, and they can receive this, and they can receive this and show emotion, and they can just kind of like move on. With women, what I found is that they will work together in your system, in your concept, and work together to be more connected in what you're trying to execute offensively and defensively. So they're always constantly they're really giving maximum effort to connect on a team level, on a connected level in terms of what you're trying to execute on offense and on defense. The other thing is that the emotional part of coaching too is that you may have to have some more individual discussions and more discussions with your women's team. I find just sometimes it's not even just so much about basketball all the time. It's just a different kind of conversation where they can express themselves, because I think, again, without the ego, oftentimes in terms of the issues of selfishness, they know what the right thing is. They know what they need to do and how they need to behave, and so oftentimes they can formulate and come up with the right response and the right way to move forward on their own. And so it's a little bit different to coach women, because you just have to kind of gently facilitate that. And I think that idea about the less ego part is for sure something that I see and recognize.
Tom, this has been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed the deep dive that we did here today on this topic, and the questions I thought were excellent. So what would be the best way for the coaches out there who want to connect with you and maybe ask additional questions? What would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, they can just go to my Facebook. My platform on my website is not up, but I can. So if they just go to Tom Johnson on Facebook, Belgium, they'll be able to find me, and they can message me there. I don't know if I can yeah, I think that's probably the best way for them to reach me.
Excellent. Excellent. Coach, thank you for being a part of this today. I'm going to go ahead and end the session here for today. And everyone, please check our schedule. We're adding new coaches daily for the rest of this week, and looking forward to connecting with each of you possibly at a later date. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Lacy.
Thank you, Tom.
All right, bye-bye.